stars ain't coming. Turning on.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Spoiler Warning podcast. This is review number 784 with a review of A Complete Unknown. I'm Christopher Schnese.
And I'm Stephen Miller.
And if you're joining us for the first time, the Spoiler Warning podcast is a weekly film review program. Each week on the show, we're going to dive in, debate, discuss, and argue over the latest films coming to a theater near you. This week, we're rushing out to see the new Bob Dylan biopic. Same difference, I guess.
It works.
Stephen, you a fan of the old Bobby D?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so my dad was, if not quite a Dylanologist or whatever you would call them, like my dad was definitely a big Bob Dylan fan. He had one of those kind of drawers full of vinyl sleeves, like multiple pieces of furniture devoted to that, vinyl and CD sleeves. And I remember like 2 full rows being just Bob Dylan things.
Nice.
And so obviously when I was like coming of age musically in like high school, especially, I listened to a good bit of Bob Dylan, especially the run from Freewheelin' to like Blonde on Blonde, which is basically the time that this movie takes place, plus maybe 1 year. So I can't say I know that much about his like 70s and 80s career. Like I've listened to a few records, but the stretch of time that this movie is about, I'm like very familiar with every song that was performed. So yeah, I would say I'm a Dylan fan. Now, I haven't listened to him intentionally in many years, until the last few days where I've been listening to him kind of nonstop. How about you? What is your relationship to Bob Dylan?
Yeah, like my relationship to Bob Dylan is mostly just through osmosis in the culture, right? Like before literally this afternoon, I had never intentionally hit play on a Bob Dylan song. The closest thing was probably the 9 Days song called Bob Dylan, where they quote him a few times during a few sections after the chorus. But I just, it was one of those things where like I was aware of Bob Dylan's existence. I've heard his music, played live before in people's backyards and stuff as people cover those songs. But I never like really got into Dylan, right? But as I kept constantly watching the trailer, I was like, I could probably listen to some Bob Dylan. like I had heard some not great things about this film leading up to sitting down to watch it, but I was also kind of like, if this is just 2.5 hours of like pretty damn good music, I won't hate this. You know what I mean? So I was in a way like I wasn't excited, but I was liking what I was getting from Timothée Chalamet's like performance of Bob Dylan in the trailers, and I was kind of excited to figure out what we were going to get.
All right, so you play Bob Dylan intentionally for the first time. What do you reach for? Do you just go on like Spotify and hit the top song? Do you do an album like Highway 61 Revisited? Like, what's the move?
I just went to the album that has the famous cover that they shoot in the scene in this movie, and I just played that album. Yeah. So yeah. That was my move.
I kind of had the same journey that I'm learning Dylan went on, or people did in the moment, where when I was in high school, it was Freewheelin' and The Times They Are Changin', like the classic kind of folk protest music that he played. That was what really blew my mind, because I could like understand the lyrics, right? Like there's a song Masters of War that gets played in this movie where he's singing right after the Cuban Missile Crisis that is like very damning of the government. And as a like brooding high schooler, I was like, oh hell yeah, this song is so edgy. And then you get a little older and you realize that it's kind of like the more interesting poetry that's hard to understand of his later work that gets you more excited. So I kind of had the same basic progression that Timothée Chalamet does in this movie.
Yeah, so you were really into him before he picked up an electric guitar and then ruined everything, right?
Oh yeah, when he went electric, I was out. I did one last Dylan story is I did maybe the first concert I ever went to with my dad was seeing Bob Dylan play at it was called the Cox Arena, I think, actually down in San Diego.
Yeah.
And that is when I learned what is apparently very well known about Dylan, which is whenever he plays a song live, he will just completely change it, like do whatever melody he feels like in the moment or change words around. I really thought I was going to hear like a faithful rendition of all the classics. And instead it's just, you're going to see Dylan be Dylan. So basically the going electric move at the Newport Folk Festival. That's kind of just every concert he does now is like intentionally fucking with the audience.
At any point, did he just give up partway through and turn around and start walking away from the audience?
I wouldn't say that, but he did most of it. I mean, of course, he was quite old by the time this happened, but he did most of it just kind of like looking down at a keyboard, you know, not really playing to the crowd in any meaningful way.
Cool. Well, ready to get into this, Stephen?
I'm ready.
All right, let's take a listen to the trailer for A Complete Unknown and then come back and give you all a review.
You tramped all the way from Minnesota. Why is that?
I wanted to catch a spark.
If you're traveling in the North Country Fair.
I say no one wants to hear what a kid wrote last month.
Well, I like your songs.
Where the winds hit heavy on the borderline.
Who wrote this? He did.
Remember me.
How about that Joan Baez, folks?
But she's pretty. Sings pretty. Maybe a little too pretty. Your songs are like an oil painting at the dentist's office.
You're kind of an asshole, Bob.
If you go with snowflake storm, when the rivers freeze and summer ends.
For anyone who's gonna hold your attention on stage, you have to kind of be a freak.
Yeah, you can be beautiful or you can be ugly, but you can't be plain.
Keep her from the howling winds.
When's the new album out?
Soon. 200 people in that room, and each one wants me to be somebody else. They should just let me be.
Let you be what?
Whatever it is they don't want me to be.
I hear Bob is playing electric.
Not on our stage, he isn't.
Oh my God, it's Bob Dylan.
Once upon a time, you're just so fine.
They just want me singing Blowing in the Wind for the rest of my goddamn life.
Then you
Well, this is gonna piss some people off.
You came here with nothing but a guitar. You never talk about your family, your past.
People make up their past, Sylvie. They remember what they want. They forget the rest.
I want to know which side he's on.
I'm not sure they want to hear what I want to play, Johnny.
I want to hear it.
How does it feel?
Turn it down! Play it loud. Make some noise, BD.
To have you on your own, like a complete unknown, like a rolling stone.
All right, so that was the trailer for A Complete Unknown. It is a Bob Dylan story based off the book Bob Dylan Goes Electric. And yeah, Stephen, what did you think of A Complete Unknown?
I found this movie to be a very kind of strange combination of a biopic. I mean, you mentioned that listening to the trailer, hearing Chalamet, you felt like you could probably just enjoy 2.5 hours of the music, you know, and at least have a reasonably okay time. And I felt that, and that is 100% true. Like that did happen for me. I mean, I think Timothée Chalamet does a really great impression of Dylan. And like, I say impression, I guess like a little bit condescendingly, because I don't know that he found anything super interesting or new in him, but like he does a really great job of sounding like him without being like an over-the-top parody either. Like it really seems like what I know of Dylan, and having heard these songs many, many, many times before in album form, I really thought when I heard the trailer that they might have done a thing where they like blended Bob Dylan's voice with his, because it was so uncannily similar. And he just does a really, really, really good job. And the songs are a delight. I mean, he's clearly the person with the most like athletic performance, but Edward Norton is great singing as Pete Seeger. Like he sings Wimowet himself, and like, I don't know what kind of autotune they had to use, but he hits those high notes like a motherfucker. Monica Barbaro, who I wasn't familiar with, playing Joan Baez, like she sounds amazing too. Like the music in this movie sounds really, really great. And whenever they're singing, I'm enjoying the fact that they're singing. But this movie is like 80% people singing the whole songs from beginning to end. And that feels like it's trying to compensate for a lack of a real story that it knows how to tell. And that story I find kind of a confusing combination of things. Like, in one sense, this feels a lot like the cliches of Walk the Line, Mangold's other movie. I mean, it has the unknown who rises to prominence when people like hear him and are like, oh my God, what is this genius? And then he gets on a stage, and then when he's in the spotlight, then he starts to have the kind of crash of stardom and then try to find himself again. The difference is Johnny Cash in Walk the Line is like very easy to understand what is going on with him. He is like, he's battling addiction, the pressure is getting to him too much. We watch him self-destruct. This movie can't do that for Dylan because it can't really peel back the curtain. Like, him being a mystery is like the point of the movie and the point of the character, which is fine. That is great. Like, that is the Dylan icon or whatever, is this guy who is kind of like hard to decipher, and he seems to kind of blend into whatever, the cultural moment is. Except if the tone of the movie is like, look at this guy who is having this downfall and struggling, but then we're staring at a person we don't understand. It is a very weird combination to me. And I think the epitome of that is there are scenes maybe like 2/3 of the way through the movie where Dylan, he's in his like Highway 61 revisited era. So he's like recording Like a Rolling Stone and all of those hits. And he's got a crew of guys who it vaguely seems like he must be drinking and doing drugs with or something, but we don't actually know if he's strung out. Like, we don't see him engaging in the destructive behavior. We just kind of see him doing the Hollywood movie tropes that a person who was strung out would then do. And that, I don't know, I found it odd, the combination of tone and story that this movie goes for. And it means you have a lot of moments that feel very powerful in a sense, Elle Fanning, as they call her Sylvie here, Susie Rotolo is the real person's name, watching Bob Dylan sing from an audience and like crying as he sings and realizing that something is changing in their relationship. And it feels like a good movie moment, but I'm also thinking like, why is this happening? I don't really feel like this movie justified the way that they're, separating, or why this would be the moment it all comes crashing down. And that kind of thing just happened a bunch. So there's one thing I think the movie does very, very, very well from a plot point, and it's kind of, I would say, like the main set piece, like the reason this movie exists, which is going electric at the Newport Folk Festival. Like, I'd heard that story a million times before. I knew that it happened, and it always sounded really quaint and kind of silly. Like, oh, these silly people in like the mid 1960s, where the very gentle sound that we now hear when like the organ comes on for like a Rolling Stone, like the idea that people would be like rioting because of that always seemed hilarious to me. In the context of the movie, the way they play up Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie and Dylan's relationship to folk as a movement, like they pull that off. They make me at least 100% believe it is daring for him to go on stage. It is risky for him to do that. There's actual like palpable tension and something new is happening. And so the movie nails that, right? Props for that. It's kind of like the reason the movie exists, and I think it rocks it. But for 2.5 hours, I don't know, I felt like at least like an hour and a half of this movie was just kind of paint by numbers biopic, which leaves me just feeling a little confused and disappointed in it. That was a long ramble. How did you feel about this movie?
Yeah, I feel everything that you felt, right? Like, I got what I asked for, which was just 2.5 hours of really good songs. Turns out if somebody makes like 55 albums, it's not hard to find a few bangers to build your movie around. I mean, I guess they were doing a window of time, so they had limited choices at the time.
Yeah,
right?
This is actually just like a representative sample of the decade. Like, he was so fucking good that decade. It's pretty unreal.
But anyways, I joke, but any moment that is Timothée Chalamet, like any moment that anybody is singing is brilliant in this film. Like, all those scenes are great. Like, you really see and feel the emotion of the music, and it feels like, I'm I have to, because for obvious reasons. But like if you compare this to like the Elvis movie, right?
Sure.
In the Elvis movie, everybody's like, oh my God, you hear this guy singing this song? Isn't this like the greatest thing that's ever existed? And when I watch it, I'm like, I get that people love Elvis. So and I know that movie was heightened stylistically, but like when you're watching it, you're like, people are obsessing over Elvis, and you're like, that's more of the celebrity of Elvis, not the music, right? I mean, it is the music for people in real life, but like in the movie, it's like, here's a song, you know, people are going crazy in this like stylized way where they're like fevering for Elvis. In this film, it's people just silently watching him play, and then you just feel the emotions of the song, right? The way you would if you just like put on headphones and sat alone and just thought about it to yourself. You're watching these other characters do that in public, and I think that those moments are brilliant. Like, it's the first time that I've watched a person playing that's supposed to be the discovery moment, and everybody's like, oh my God, that guy is going to be the one. And I go, oh my God, that guy is going to be the one. I honestly feel that this kid is going to be something amazing, right? You know, like I believe it in the moment. It sucks me in every time he's playing, or anybody in the film is playing. I am the only plot beats that I give any shit about in this film, other than just listening to the music, is Edward Norton's character. Because he is, it doesn't feel like the, oh my God, we can't let them he really cares about folk, and I believe him, and I feel his disappointment, and he doesn't have the same disappointment that like the owners of the venue do. He is like holding on to an ideal of this type of music and what it means, and he doesn't want that to change. And he sort of, it feels like he, you know, saw Bob Dylan and was like, this is the guy who can take our music and bring it to the world. And then he did it, but he's going to change it. And like that fear, I believe from his sense. I didn't make the full leap that you did to like people would riot because he's playing electric guitar. Like, I think Rolling Stone is a pretty damn good song. You know
of course. I just mean this story is like legendary. You hear it all the time about Dylan, that it was like he tore down the house at the festival and it was like such a big deal.
I know. I get that it would be a big deal, but like in my head, it would be like a new sound, and it's disappointing to everybody, and he tears down the house by like actually playing stuff that everybody's like, actually, I'm kind of into this, right? But instead, those first two songs, like, I was also like, all right, I'm ready to riot too. I've been sitting here for 2.5 hours and you're playing this song. Like, this is the one you
Farm
choose.
is a banger.
But for me, like, I didn't care about the arc. I didn't care about any of the story of this Bob Dylan character and kind of what he was going through. He did sell it to me, though, like somebody who was in search of something, found it, then the world wanted something of him forever, and he's like, but that's not what I'm here for. And it's like he felt like too much stuff was on his shoulder, and he sort of becomes just kind of like, he's not like, you said that he acts almost like he's abusing drugs and stuff, like in a normal biopic, but really he like, you never see it. To me, I just feel like he's just literally regular depressed because he feels like he has to be somebody I don't want to be. Terrible impression.
Yeah, he's trapped. He's basically trapped in the image.
Yeah. And it's like, that kind of worked for me in theory, but to me, I didn't know enough about this historic moment where he's going to like literally go electric in front of people. So like whenever these moments are happening, it's like, unless I'm looking at Edward Norton's face and seeing his disappointment, I'm like, what's the big deal? Like when they're sitting around the table and the guy's like, he ain't playing electric guitar on my stage. I'm like, who the fuck are you? Like,
yeah, and it's a funny distinction because Johnny Cash has already been established as like at least rockabilly, you know, like certainly already interesting. I would say Johnny Cash is no less riotous or whatever than whatever Bob Dylan did. Yeah. But it might just be like Dylan's purity as a folk singer before that makes them so upset about it.
Yeah. So, you know, for me, I enjoyed aspects of this film. When I think back on it, I'm like, that story was kind of nonsense. I know you didn't leave for, or sorry, you didn't stay for the Q&A. Like, we saw AMC was doing like a early screening with a Q&A rebroadcast or whatever. And Mangold during that, like somebody like Gwyneth Paltrow asked him, well, why did you want to make this? And he's like, oh, I just was really wrapped up in the story of somebody who was lost, found a home, then was lost. Or he's lost, so he leaves. He finds a new home, finds a place to be, then gets lost again, so he leaves again. And like, I was like, yeah, on paper, I know why you wanted to do this story. I think you got lost in the emotion of being in Bob Dylan's presence and not in the on paper version of that story you wanted to tell, because you bypass the story. It's like Timothée Chalamet kept talking about it being like a character study, and I was like, it's not really a character study. You did a character study, and then you brought us the presence of Bob Dylan. But I don't think we had a complete arc to participate in. We just get to see moments of his public expression of his skill and his talent,
right?
And then we participated in the reaction to seeing him play live, and that has merit. It did for me in the moment of those, 2 to 3 minute songs. Like it did for me what it was supposed to. I felt transported, and then as soon as the song stops playing, I was like, oh, are we talking about this again? Like,
yeah,
I just didn't care, and I kind of, that's what I was missing from this story.
Yeah. I think, I guess for me, the bar that I want to measure it against is like, what is this doing as a feature film that is different than like a documentary, because there have been many, or a concert film, or listening to Dylan's albums, right, can do. Because you can definitely watch a documentary and see Bob Dylan performing and sounding amazing. You can see him being elusive. You can see how the culture responded to it. And it feels like a movie like this, the point is interiority, or at least getting a close-up of that information. And there are like little hints that the movie is sprinkling of like, we're going to pierce this image a little bit, right? Like Timothée Chalamet, he's kind of presented as being, I'm not going to say a poser, but he like absorbs things through osmosis and then almost immediately spits them back out, right? Like in the start of the movie, he doesn't really know anything about social justice, right? Like Sylvie basically has to teach him everything, right?
Yeah.
He joins things because of her. And then I don't know the real timeline, but in the politics of the movie, it's like within a year or something, he is the face of protest, right? Yeah. And then he kind of discards her and moves on to the next thing. And like the movie, it's like dabbling in that idea of like, man, this guy is like kind of just chews people up and then spits them out and moves on to the next person over and over and over again. He's kind of a total dick to women,
Yeah,
like there's stuff in the movie, but then it can't like drill into that enough to really say something, because it has to cut to a scene where audiences stare at him in awe of his genius, right? Over and over again. So it's like, hey, we're not trying to make this like glorified myth of a person. Oh, by the way, let's like create the myth for 90% of the runtime. And it, to me, that just makes it weird. Like it made it enjoyable. It was both enjoyable, and I did find myself thinking, Jesus, how long is this movie? There are I don't even know if the soundtrack actually covers all of the songs that are sung in this movie, but there are 23 songs in the soundtrack, and all but 3 of them, by my count, are Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan. So this movie basically has like 20 Bob Dylan songs being sung almost in their entirety, which is, great, lovely, awesome, if your goal is to make us just be in awe of how amazing Bob Dylan is. But if your story is trying to be like, but man, think about this guy, how complicated and messy it is, then I don't know, it doesn't feel very messy when you're giving me mainlining to my veins, right? Like that much, quote, genius all the time. I don't know, it's just a kind of weird combo.
Yeah, I think that, like, I keep going back to this idea that none of the thoughts and feelings of people are in the script. They're just in the reactions to other people. And this entire film is built out of those moments of people reacting. And it's like, if there isn't a true story to tell or a true view into Bob Dylan, as you were kind of saying, it's really just the way people respond to the moment they were in his presence. And a lot of times he's kind of a dick. and that's just who he is. But like, we don't see like, we know that there's a lot of pressure on him, and we see him get upset when he's in a place where people are like, oh, I'll play this song. But like, we don't know what it means. Like, there's that line, I don't remember if it was in the trailer, but it's in the movie, where he's like, everybody, I forget what it is, but something about like, everybody's looking at me and they're not wondering, how did I do this, but how did they not do this? Or how did this thing not come to them? But like, we don't really see him expressing whatever that thing is that he's trying to express in the moment with words. We just see him, like, as you said, like a news broadcast is playing and then he immediately is like, boom, song. Or he's like walking down the street and he has a lyric and he runs into the apartment and just like, he doesn't even play like 4 notes and go like, that's kind of cool. He immediately just goes into the song. Like, I just pulled this out of thin air because I had a line that I thought was cool. And it's like, that is, I guess, interesting, but like, we don't really see his process. We don't really learn what it takes to be Bob Dylan. We just see what it takes to consume the output of being Bob Dylan. Yeah. and all those moments still work for me. I just don't think it makes a film that is coherent.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's like it's stuck on the outside, which again, there's a million ways to have a movie where you're on the outside and you don't understand the protagonist, right? I can totally imagine doing that, but the story beats, this hits are not the way to do that, right? Like a typical music biopic isn't built for that. And it's, it's just a weird combination of things. I do think the movie, you say that it's about like people responding to his genius, and I do think the movie does an okay job at painting what the culture was around his music. You can kind of think of the story of Bob Dylan is like not him as an influencer, but him as like an expression of the culture. So at the start, he is like rallying around a protest, right? He's kind of clear-eyed. He's Pete Seeger, right? Like, singing a kind of sing-along anthem, trying to rally the nation around causes or like give voice to them. And that's like Pete Seeger's mission, is like, if we all stand together with love, then we can overcome everything. And then the Vietnam War happens and the 60s drag on. And by the end, it's like, he's just a disillusioned guy. And what he wants to give voice to isn't a belief that we have power, but like, look at how crazy everything is. Nothing fucking matters. Maybe not nothing matters, but like, it's counterculture in a different way. It's like the counterculture that's just like, fuck it, rather than the counterculture of like, let's stand together. And I think the movie traces that pretty well, and like the way people would have been around that time. So to me, that gave me a new angle that, having not lived back then, I kind of didn't really understand before, and what his music represented. But again, if you wanted to follow that, then you would give more actual screen time to Elle Fanning or to Joan Baez or to like the other people in his orbit, but the movie doesn't really do that. The movie only gives them like tearful glances. The movie wants to be inside Dylan's head, or at least it doesn't want to be inside anyone else's head. And it's, I keep saying the word weird, but it's been a while since I've seen a movie where there were so many things I really like or loved about it, but then the overall product just bewilders me. and this is one of those. I was thinking, when I'm home for the holidays, inevitably I'm going to tell my dad I saw the new Bob Dylan movie. What will I tell him? Will I tell him that he should see it? Like, maybe if he just wants to know what some like young new actor will do with a Dylan impression. But like, Scorsese has done 2 documentaries about Bob Dylan. Like there's already amazing things about Bob Dylan. And I don't know what this adds, other than maybe introducing him to like a newer generation.
Yeah. Maybe that's the point, Stephen. It's how do we bring Bob Dylan to the masses? It's by giving us Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan.
I will say what this did successfully is it made me more aware of Joan Baez. Like, I was familiar with her before, but she didn't really have any meaning to me. And now seeing how they portray her in the culture, it's almost like she is like the prequel to sad girl emo music in a way. And like, I really dug it. And I've also been listening to Joan Baez a lot the last couple days for that reason.
Nice.
So thankful. And I'm kind of curious about Pete Seeger too. I think he was so wholesome. I wouldn't have really thought about him before. And now, like, knowing that wholesomeness was like a project and not just being naive, it kind of paints the folk scene in a different light, I think.
Yeah. How sad would you feel if you got signed to do this movie and then they're like, okay, you're gonna be Woody Guthrie. You're just gonna be dying
Scoot McNairy
the whole movie.
Yeah, you're the icon that inspired Bob Dylan to do his music. You are maybe the most famous folk singer of all time. You have no voice.
Yeah, you have no voice, and you don't have to learn how to play guitar because you are not going to be featured playing guitar at all.
Yeah,
ever.
I don't think they even like play a record of his in the movie. Like, if they did, they would use the real Woody Guthrie, I guess, not Scoot McNairy's voice. But
Yeah.
I don't think even that happens. You don't even get a hint as to his music.
Yeah, which is...
I guess you hear "This Land Is Your Land" being
Yeah,
played.
that's true. Wait, but Edward Norton played it though, right? On
He
his
played it,
behalf
but
in
I
the
want to say
courtroom.
"This Land Is Your Land." I really should have looked this up first. Yeah, I think Woody Guthrie wrote that song.
Yeah, I just mean that in the movie, it wasn't even like a flashback to his character singing it. It was somebody else on his behalf singing it because of whatever
Yes.
the court case was that that it was bringing
definitely.
up. Anything else you want to say about this movie, Steven?
I guess one of the elements that I found strange, and this just ties in again to the way they're mapping this onto the kind of tortured artist downfall without necessarily having the information, that you would need to make that work, is there's this character that Bob Dylan meets, a musician who he starts playing with in like the middle of his career, Bob Newworth, I think was his name, who like he meets him, he's been singing in a kind of like raucous band in a bar, and then he joins him for sessions. I feel like the movie points to him as like the canonical bad influence, and like I can't put my finger on it, but it seems to treat him in a way where like seeing him is like the sign that Dylan is like off the rocker in some way.
Like he's the one that electrified Dylan.
Yeah, but it doesn't actually tell me anything to make me understand why or what that means. And then later in the movie, when he gets to talk to Sylvie, he's being like kind of nice and normal. Like, I don't know. The treatment of his character I found very strange.
Also, the best part about that is, and I don't know, maybe this is mild spoilers, but like when he's running after her in any other movie, it's like he's the guy who's been hanging out on the side, who's always noticed her, and if she's finally done, he wants to swoop in. But he's like, hey, you should stay and watch the show.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know why, but that gave me a good chuckle.
Yep. But I do have to say, the whole going electric, not only like the sequence of them playing, but the build up to it, them going on stage, Pete Seeger trying to reason with him ahead of time, all of that worked for me amazingly. So like, if this movie wanted to end on a high note, I think it delivered. And that's why, like, leaving the theater, I still felt like I had a pretty good time. And it was only as I thought about the movie more, it kind of started to crumble a little bit in my head.
I had a good time, but why?
Yeah.
I do, though. I want to know what the direction was for the crowd during that scene, because like there's riots happening, right? People are upset. They're throwing stuff. But there's this woman in the front row who's just like having the best time of her life. She's clapping her hands and stuff. And it's like, were there different versions?
Well, like, it's like they're acknowledging that some people liked it, I guess.
Okay.
It makes me want to watch that because I know that was recorded, and I feel like I want to watch it to get a sense of how faithfully they reenacted that.
Yeah.
It would be interesting.
All right. Well, would you like to get to verdict, Stephen?
Sure.
All right. If you were going to give a complete unknown, a must-see, recommend with the caveat, wait for rental, pass with the caveat, or a must-avoid, what would you give it?
I'm giving it a wait for rental, even though I think if I were grading on the curve of what I feel like it should have been, it would be more like a pass with a caveat. Like, I'm disappointed given the amazing raw material, how this turned out. But at the same time, it has great performances all around, like great impressions, great singing. Mangold does capture the awe of listening to Bob Dylan, and like you said, most movies get that wrong when they have that like discovery scene. So it is worth something. Like, it's worth plenty of stuff. I also feel like, man, the plot is so threadbare, and there are just so many opportunities that it misses. I don't know. It's a rental. Watch it and get a kick out of Timothée Chalamet doing Bob Dylan, but just don't expect the movie to really be saying anything at all.
Yeah, it's wait for rental for me as well. There's so many moments that I enjoy, and so many things that it's doing that it's kind of doing right, but on the whole, it's just nonsense. and it was like listening to the director talk about like why he felt he needed to make the movie. I was like, yeah, but you didn't do that.
Right.
like it's there. I see the strings of what you thought you were doing, but it feels like it whatever it is, it just didn't stick the landing, or didn't stick a lot of the stuff. It didn't stick everything in between all the music.
Right.
But still enjoyable. I don't think there's anything. I mean, most of the time Bob Dylan is singing. He is like in a cramped bar or on a bed or in a studio. It's not like big. You don't need to feel even the last performance, there's like, thousands of people there or whatever, but it's still just like a field on a hill and a little tiny stage. There's nothing epic to feel like, oh, but if I was there on the big screen seeing this, it would really heighten it to a level that would be more exciting. It's like,
and we saw it in IMAX. we should mention that. So we saw it in the biggest screen one could possibly see this movie.
And I was like, could have been smaller.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you really want to get in there close, maybe go see it in IMAX if it's playing in IMAX everywhere. Yeah, so that's the thoughts on this film. This is going to be our last episode of the year. We will also later, after we return from our holiday breaks, have a review of Nosferatu. We're going to do our end of year recap episode as usual. So stay tuned for that. But just a heads up for everybody, it'll be Steven's traveling, I'm traveling, the week after he's traveling, and we'll reconvene in the new year. So we'll see you all soon. But for now, Stephen Miller, if people want to find you throughout the week, where can they do that?
People can find me at Threads or Blue Sky at sdavidmiller or sdavidmiller.com.
People can find me at ChristopherInRealLife.com or ChristopherIRL on a number of social platforms. You can find the podcast over at thespoilerwarning.com where you get a bunch of the back episodes of the show. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can do so on Overcast, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts are found. If you want to know when the episodes go live, you can follow us at twitter.com/spoilerwarning, facebook.com/thespoilerwarning, or instagram.com/thespoilerwarning. If you want to get a hold of us directly, you can send an email to fans@thespoilerwarning.com, or you can use the contact form on our site. Music for this episode will come from a track selected from artlist.io, so hopefully you're enjoying that. That's it, Steven. It's 2024. It's been an interesting year.
It sure has. I do just want to mention, by the way, I did not stay for the Q&A, but while I was leaving, I heard the best part of the Q&A, which was the screen turns on, a giant Gwyneth Paltrow appears on screen, and she says, "Hi, everyone. My name is Gwyneth." It almost made me stay just to be like, what else is she going to do? Introducing yourself.
Yeah. Later on, she hand waves away that she is an actress. She's kind of like, I mean, I do some work here and there, but it was genuinely self-deprecating, as in like, it feels like she wants more work than she's getting, but it wasn't just like, oh, I've done some things here or there.
Yeah, like when, Goop is my passion, but acting has occurred a few times. One Academy Award has been handed to me.
Oh, good times.
My head was, in fact, in a box.
Yeah, that's the hardest work of all.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Steven, should we get the hell out of here?
Sure.
All right, bye.
Bye.